In the parish records of a rural English county in the 1740s, there is a pattern. It is not obvious until you look for it, but once you see it, it does not go away. Infant burial entries cluster, not evenly through the year, not randomly. They concentrate in the months from January through March, winter. The children who died were not dying from plague or famine or epidemic, they were dying from cold. From the failure of the primitive heating systems available in 18th century homes to maintain temperatures compatible with infant survival. From the gap between what a pre-modern dwelling could provide and what a newborn human body requires. The modern thermostat, the gas boiler, the radiator. The central heating system that allows a parent to set a temperature and trust it will be maintained through the night. These are so fundamental to how we live that they have become invisible. We do not think of them as infant care technologies. We think of them as features of a house. They are infant care technologies. And the history of what happened before them exists in those parish burial records, clustered in winter, waiting to be read. The newborn human body is poorly equipped for thermal regulation. Adults can shiver, the involuntary muscle contraction that generates heat. Newborns cannot do this effectively. They have a mechanism called non-shivering thermogenesis, in which brown adipose tissue, a specialized fat that exists in neonates but diminishes through childhood, generates heat through metabolic activity. But this mechanism has limits. It requires calories to sustain. It can be overwhelmed by sustained cold. And it provides no protection against the rapid heat loss that occurs when a small body is placed in a cold environment. The temperature range in which a newborn can maintain its core temperature without significant metabolic stress is narrow. Below approximately 68 degrees Fahrenheit, a newborn begins to consume resources to maintain warmth that it cannot spare without compromising growth, feeding, and ultimately survival. The dwellings of pre-industrial Europe were frequently colder than this for significant portions of the winter. Stone walls, inadequate insulation, fires that required fuel and constant attention and went out at night. Windows that were not designed to retain heat. Floors that were stone or earth. In these conditions, the problem of keeping a newborn warm was real, immediate, and solved with whatever was available. The solutions were inventive and not always safe. Swaddling, wrapping an infant tightly in layers of cloth, was the oldest and most universal technique. Evidence of swaddling appears in artwork from ancient Greece, Rome, and across medieval Europe. The physical logic was sound. Tightly wrapping the infant in layers of cloth reduced the surface area from which heat could escape and provided some insulation. The problems were also real. Tightly swaddled infants could overheat in warm conditions. They could not move freely, raising questions, debated by physicians across centuries, about whether restriction affected limb development. And swaddling left them dependent on the caretaker to reposition them, to unwrap and rewrap for feeding and changing, in conditions where the caretaker might be exhausted or briefly absent. The shared bed was, as with nighttime safety, the primary thermal solution. The adult body maintains a temperature that warms the space around it. A newborn placed against a mother's body benefits from that heat. The arrangement was warm, immediate, and effective. It was also, as noted, associated with a risk of overlying that killed a calculable number of infants. Warming pans, metal containers filled with hot coals or hot water, placed in the bed before the infant was laid down, were used to pre-warm sleeping spaces. They were also occasional fire hazards. Records of injuries and deaths from warming pan accidents appear in 17th and 18th century case reports. Swaddling near a fire, placing a baby on a warm stone, tucking an infant inside adult clothing. Every practical approach that the conditions allowed was used, because the alternative, in the worst winter weeks of a 17th century stone cottage, was a baby that failed to make it to spring. The parish burial records are the evidence of how imperfect these solutions were. Infant mortality in pre-industrial Europe was staggeringly high by modern standards, somewhere between 150 and 300 deaths per 1,000 live births, depending on the period, the country, and the social conditions. Not all of those deaths were cold-related. Disease, malnutrition, and the complications of birth itself accounted for large numbers. But the seasonal clustering in winter months is documented across multiple European populations and multiple centuries, pointing to temperature as a specific and significant factor. The Industrial Revolution brought coal. Coal heating was more efficient than wood, longer burning, more manageable overnight. The houses of the 19th century in industrial regions were, for families who could afford coal, meaningfully warmer in winter than what had preceded them. Central heating arrived in stages. Steam heating systems appeared in large buildings in the early 19th century. Hot water radiator systems were developed through the latter half of the 19th century and became available in middle-class housing in the early 20th. Gas central heating, with its thermostats and boilers and the ability to maintain a consistent temperature through the night, became widely available in the mid-20th century. At each stage, infant winter mortality declined, not only because of heating, improvements in nutrition, sanitation, medical care, and a dozen other factors operated simultaneously, but the correlation between household temperature control and infant survival is documented clearly enough in the historical record to make the case that the radiator is, among other things, an infant survival technology. The thermostat you set before you go to bed, the one that means you do not wake up to check whether the room is too cold, is solving a problem that mothers solved for tens of thousands of years with their own bodies. There is something to sit with here. The history of infant survival is often told as a history of medicine. Vaccines, antibiotics, surgical capability, nutritional science. These things are genuinely revolutionary. They changed what was possible for babies who would previously have died of specific identifiable causes. But below all of that is something more basic. A baby needs to be warm. A baby needs to be fed. A baby needs to be heard when it makes a sound. For most of human history, the technologies that addressed those needs were a mother's body, a mother's presence, and a mother's attention. The modern home, heated, monitored, stocked with formula as a backup, equipped with a baby camera and a breathing sensor and a device that will alert a parent to any change in the baby's state, has replaced functions that were previously performed entirely by maternal proximity. We have built infrastructure around the baby. Before we did, the infrastructure was a person. Subscribe if you want to keep following this. Every week, the history that was hiding in the things we've stopped noticing because we take them for granted.